Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us, and welcome once again to another highlight of your week. I'm sure another Thursday's teissTalk. Today, we're going to be talking about maintaining your credibility as a security advisor. We have got three fabulous guests who we've just been chatting away in the green room behind. I'll be bringing them on very shortly. But first, of course, the initial house notice is, if you want to win a teissTalk mug, don't forget to put your question into the chat. No, sorry, that way. Into the chat that way, so that we can see it. We will award a mug to the best question, the funniest question, the question that makes the panel struggle the most, whatever it is. It might just be one that, I see a name that I like. Who knows? But without further ado, shall we move on? Can I invite onto stage, please, Laurie, Graydon, and Alan? Hello, Laurie.
Hi, thanks for having me. Good to be back.
Absolute pleasure. Hello, Graydon.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, good. And Alan, welcome back, sir.
Thank you, Tom. Afternoon, everybody.
So, let's move straight on, shall we, to the news item. And wouldn't you know it, surprises of surprises, this is a headline from the RSA conference currently this week. The headline reads, 70% of businesses prioritize innovation over security in generative AI projects. Now, for me, this seems entirely normal. Surely, innovation is what drives business and change. And so therefore I'm trying to work out if 70% is low or high. Surely we have to suspend, certain elements of a normal business activities when we're innovating, right?
Yes, I would say definitely so. I think that I would think that 70% number is actually quite low. I don't know what Laurie and Alan think, but we as security professionals are there to support our companies, and there are business decisions that are going to be made and business risk decisions that may trump what we do from a security side of things. Not that we don't do anything, but that we step them down. Many companies are involved in regulation and that, so there is a minimum level that they're going to have to hit. But really, for us to be successful, we have to enable the business to be as agile as they can be to move forward. And so while I think of myself as a brake, I don't consider myself to be a stop for them. I might slow them down and try to help steer them in a slightly different direction, but that's about it.
I completely agree with you, Graydon. I thought it would be higher. And it's really interesting. Obviously, it's a security article. We're sat here as security professionals, so obviously it's top of mind for us. But at the end of the day, the most organizations that are adopting Gen AI are doing so for these projects to innovate and to stand out from competitors, to do things differently and to be more efficient in what they do. So it's not going to be top of mind. But I think the thing is, most organizations are still in experimentation mode. So they're not necessarily developing their own tools at this stage, but using existing products that are out there. So there's a lot of responsibility on the product vendors themselves to be thinking about the security. But there is a responsibility on organizations using these to think about the types of data that they're putting in and be accountable for that and what could go wrong.
Look, I can only echo what Graydon and Laurie have just said. I like the brake analogy Graydon used, because as a bit of a petrol head myself, better brakes actually allow you to go faster because you can carry more speed into the corners deeper and start accelerating sooner. So that's the analogy I like to use. It's not the stopping the business, it's allowing the business to take more risk, recognizing that business leaders are entrepreneurs, and that's what drives innovation. And to Laurie's point, we security folks are generally not. We're more risk averse. And I'm generalizing at this point, so forgive me. But actually, our role is to advise the business in terms of what risks they can safely take and where they start to get into the more risky space. But that'll be their decision. and we need to support them in that to enable them. Isn't that the definition of security? Freedom from fear. So we should be promoting that.
And none of these thoughts surprise me, because any sort of decent, modern, forward-looking CISO or security professional is going to be echoing this. The purpose of the CISO is to allow the business to do more things, sell more stuff, just do it securely, as it were. And sometimes you have to, as it were, let off the brakes a little bit, just so that we can get ahead in the market, or make some progress, etc. But interesting, you don't have to go very far. In fact, only the second and third sentence virtually into the article. It says it also found that less than a quarter of generative AI projects are being secured, and despite 82% of respondents admitting that secure and trustworthy AI is essential to the security of their business. So you've got a little bit of a sort of clash or a conflict of priorities here. So how do we find that balance?
If I may, I'm going to draw out Laurie's point around the providers, the vendors, the service providers. There's almost an implicit, if not explicit, assumption that they're developing these, offering these in a secure manner. Now, often that's incorrect or not valid, but that's the assumption that the general business user kind of starts with. And indeed, recent UK legislation is putting more onus on the vendors to bring to market secure products with a support mechanism that enhances security through life. But that's not where most vendors are. That's not where many vendors are today, and I think that's where the risk comes into play. But we've got to remember here that risk isn't always bad. No. And that's the tension, the business relationship piece that we have to get alongside rather than play catch up.
We also have to keep in mind, to kind of build on what Alan was saying too, is that, as I mentioned earlier, there are minimums that we have to hit with regulation and all of that. And I found in my career that when a new regulation or a new law comes out, that generally people just sort of pause and stop a little bit and see, are they really going to enforce this? Or was this something that the politicians did for re-election and all of that? And so there is a little bit of that. And then when the governments start enforcing things, are the fees and penalties as such that it then becomes another business risk for them? Some of them are willing to pay a certain level of fees and all of that to maintain the ability to be agile. And so as security professionals, it's beholden upon us not to teach people to speak our language, but to speak the language of the C-suite and to really help them identify opportunities where they can be secure and still accelerate. And honestly, that's a challenge too, because we have to be up on the regulations. We have to think outside the box. We have to be, we started out our profession as basically a binary role, like a yes or a no. And now everything is kind of a maybe, or let's modify things a little bit. So, as professionals, as Alan said, we tend to be a little bit more binary, risk adverse. And we have to kind of sometimes, it's like letting our kids walk for the first time. They're going to stumble. They're going to fall into furniture. They're going to get hurt. Sometimes they're going to cry, and you got to pick them up and let them know, yeah, it's good. Keep going.
And to make your point, we need to take risks sometimes. And depending on the business model, the use cases for these projects, some of them are incredible, right? You think about things like improving accessibility for those who are disabled, like the projects that are going through this are absolutely crazy. So we need to weigh out the benefits. And if you're using an off-the-shelf commercial platform, then it's about, okay, let's put some kind of data security wording into our policies and make sure that we're providing the right training to our employees. We can do threat modeling to look at, well, what are the scenarios that we're concerned with introducing this type of new technology to our organization. But then if you're kind of going to build something in-house, then coming back to Alan's point, we need some secure by design principles to make sure that we're building it in from the start.
Yeah. And there's a comment. Martin Hepworth has made an early bid for the mug. He said, identifying the risk, not reducing to zero, then we can treat it or not to a level that it's acceptable to. This level may be dynamic. Something about a song accepting the risk. Well, Martin, I think you've already won the mug based on that reference alone. But this is true. It's the risk levels. The risk will change very dynamically and very actively. Certainly in the case of a brand new technology such as AI, where we are literally. I was at a breakfast briefing the other day. Literally, the phrase used was, "There's no such thing as a perfect game when it comes to adopting AI. Things are going to go wrong," and I think that's a very that's very relevant here.
I'd like to. Sorry, I keep jumping in, but
no, do please.
I think that's important. At least, and I've heard this from a number of other people, so I believe that it's relatively true, no matter where you are around the globe. But we learn more from our failures than from our mistakes. And raising children is one of those. We can be the ones that are hovering over them, making sure nothing goes wrong, which is, I think, what security was 20 years ago. And we're now to the point where we just want to make sure the failure is not catastrophic. And so we allow some risks there, understanding that, sometimes somebody's hand has to get burned to learn not to touch a hot stove. And you can tell them and you can tell them and you can tell them. And then when they touch it, well, then they know. And now we can figure out how to move forward. And so I think that's a little analogous to what we as security professionals need to evolve into. Understanding what the risks are is understanding not only the possibility of what the failure could be, but then trying to figure out what the probability would be, and realizing that nothing is 100% and we're going to be wrong too sometimes.
Yeah. We need to share our understanding, right? This is relatively new still. So the more we learn and the more we can share, it is going to be great going forward.
I think that goes to... Sorry, Tom, forgive me. I think that goes to the heart of the exam question we were posed. How do we maintain our credibility? Without showing my age too much here, but when I came into this game over 30 years ago, it was very much a book of rules. Thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that. We have mostly moved away from that, but not completely. That's why I think it was Graydon talked about guardrails. Laurie talked about experimentation to find out where the boundaries are. Those are absolutely things we need to be doing today, because to Martin's point, it isn't about eliminating risk. It's about getting the risk to an acceptable level, but recognizing that risk tolerance that we're implicitly accepting actually varies by individual, by location, and it particularly varies over time. So it's not static. So there's in fact, there's a developing market around what they call continuous controls assessment, recognizing that a point-in-time test was only good at the point of test. It was probably limited in scope as well. Whereas with an always-on business, with an always connected business, with the with that cloud presence that we've now got, you've got to be on your game all the time. So it has to be continuous. And that's as applicable to an advisor. I'm having to keep myself up to date, and I'm not necessarily sure I am up to date. One of my favorite phrases is, I'm not a techie, I talk to techies. Now, of course, to 95% of the population, that's not true. I am techie compared to them. But because we're in the industry, we know what geeks really are, and I know I'm not one. Or at least I'd like to think I'm not. But it's that degrees, isn't it? It's that perspective. At the enterprise level, the idea of risk tolerance, 3 lines of defense, overlapping controls, that's normal because they can afford to do it. That's the acceptable cost of business. Try doing that to a small business or a startup. Doesn't play. So we have to be mindful of that. In fact, an expression that I picked up in the last couple of months is about right-sizing our solution to the business at its stage of maturity. That does not mean going for a magic quadrant top right corner solution all of the time, because it's not going to be the right size. It's not going to be the right fit unless they're a very cash rich startup. So, those are all the things that I've had to develop over my, I don't know, whatever it is now, 15 plus years as an advisor, whether I've been an advisor inside the business, advising the business as an employee, or as an external advisor, trusted or otherwise. It's about staying current, because the answers today are very different to what they were 10 years ago.
Yeah. And despite your very slick segue into our main item, I am going to pick up on a comment here from James, which says, it always depends, and what it depends on depends. Although I am always surprised when companies which develop their own products without considering security assume every single one of their suppliers is completely trustworthy and has built security into the foundations. And I think that's very true on something like this, where it, specifically back to the news item, where we might have suspended or relaxed security, our security posture to allow for development and innovation, etc., will so have potentially all of our supply chain all the way up to this point as well.
Yeah, like the supply chain piece is an interesting one, because people tend to look down the supply chain. I would suggest you also need to look up at the customers too, because risk flows both ways.
One of the things I'd like to add here that I think is kind of important to kind of augment what Alan was saying too is, just like a security test and outside of continuous monitoring is a point in time, when we look at risk and the threats to our businesses and our systems and all of that, we need to realize that they're ever evolving. And a decision that we make today, which may be a valid risk acceptance, as the world changes and moves on, and we see different trends going on coming from the attackers' communities, that risk may not be the same tomorrow, next week, next month. And we have to have the right sort of relationship with our business leaders that we can go up and say, the landscape has changed. And this may prompt you to make another risk-based decision. That decision could be continue forward as we are, or it could be, let's start to put some compensating controls in. Maybe not 100%, but let's maybe start to get a better feel for it. I tend to fall back on, no matter what we do, we need to have a robust way to recover, because bad things are going to happen no matter what. So,
and to your point, we need to relate it back to, coming back to your point, Graydon, around like the relationship with the business. I find a lot of the time kind of I see people putting forward kind of ideas around risk and what they've seen in industry, but still not relating back to business, the actual organization's business strategy and what are their objectives and key results, and having that context around it can really help us be more specific. And, if you tie that in and combine it with someone like Alan, who's got your 30 years of experience, you got your dream team, right? And I think that's something in terms of credibility as an advisor, you need that evidence-based kind of suggestions and recommendations, because you've had that experience, but then you top that up with, well, what does this mean to the business? What's the so what? So you're avoiding just coming up with generic cybersecurity gobbledygook that doesn't really mean anything.
Absolutely.
I've got to come in there, Laurie. Forgive me, because so what is my favourite question, because that's the one we get from the board, isn't it? It's the what are you talking about? What does this mean? And you want more money to do what? I don't know what you did last time. And that's the challenge that we face so much of the time, and it's a valid challenge, by the way, because some of the numbers that get thrown around in our space are ridiculous when you look at it. But that's probably a topic for another day. But we have to be able to answer that so what question. The evidence that if you're not measuring it, you're not doing it. That is a reality. It's not a perfect one, though. We do have to take some leaps of faith sometimes, where we're having to make a judgment, if you will, on a limited set of facts. Where do we think it's going to go? And absolutely, to Graydon's point, we have to keep that under review because the context changes. That's why I still enjoy it, quite frankly, because I can't just go to the shelf, dust off the solution that worked last time and redeploy it, because it might not be right, it might not be appropriate, it might not be affordable. I enjoy that piece, but this last piece about measuring the impact of actions and advice, the challenge that we get from the CFO or the FD or the board themselves about, right, you want this much money to do this, but what am I going to do? What am I going to do with that? What am I going to see with that? We have to think more about proving the effectiveness of the money we've spent. That doesn't just mean a pen test, by the way. That's almost lazy, actually. But it's, we've got to own some kind of measure of effectiveness piece, which might be, to Graydon's point, we still need to invest in the robust backup because some of our controls might not be watertight. They might not keep the bad people out. I was about to go, anyway, we'll keep the bad people out. That's the reality. I was on a call this morning with a client where it was necessary to remind them that our worst case is the authorized user, whether it's their device that has been compromised or they themselves have gone rogue for whatever reason. That's the really difficult one, and that's the one that we don't want to think about. We don't want to think about our colleague next door doing something malicious, but it happens. The insider threat is real, but we've got to be careful not to go and the Reds are under the bed type piece. The 1950s.
McCarthyism.
Exactly. That's not what I'm advocating, but it's that having a 360 view that is continuously updated, that says to the board, continuous improvement is going to be necessary here. That means you're going to have to continue spending money, not just spend a portion and think the job's done and you can move on to something else. That's a really difficult conversation, but it's one we have to have.
But you bring up that point around kind of they're not measuring the impact of those decisions, right? And this is kind of where my piece comes in around why I got into cyber risk quantification and kind of the use case for that. So a lot of the focus is primarily around, well, what is my risk exposure in a range? But I really like the use case around, well, what's the cost benefit? What's the impact on risk reduction from making all these decisions? And I think as people, we don't spend enough time reflecting on our decisions. We go and make the decisions, it's done, and then we move on to the next thing because we're often firefighting in this kind of industry. But I think that use case is so integral to be moving forward, especially in the cyber risk governance space now, and definitely seeing improvements in that. And there was a comment in the chat, I think it was James, around how is it okay to not know? How important is it for your credibility to just be able to see either I just don't know or let me find out I got it wrong? And my stance on this is, I talk a lot about cyber strategy, risk quantification. If you were going to come and ask me for expert advice on identity access management, for example, I know the person to go to. I think in this kind of industry, it's okay to say that I do not know everything. Alan said he's still learning. We are all still learning. Everything's happening every day. But that's why our network is so important, and building our tribe around us of experts in the different domain areas in this field. So James, my point is, I think it's okay to not know, but normally we know who does know, and come back to it.
What I'd like to add to that is, I'm sorry, Alan.
So if I may, Graydon, there's no place for bluffing in this game. Yes. If you don't know, admit it, but you know somebody to go and ask, and I'll get back to you with an answer, and I'll do it within an hour, within a day, something reasonable. Sorry, Graydon, back to you.
Oh. No, that's okay. It was a perfect, thing for me to add on to, which is I found in my career, and I'm sure Alan has too, and Laurie has too, and other people that are listening to this, the moment that I became comfortable with saying, I don't know, I'll find out, is the point where you actually, I think, increase your credibility. Yes. You're not trying to come up with something. You're not trying, it's like, hey, that's a good question, and if they say, well, why don't you already know? Well, you know how many variables are involved in this? So I need to go take a look at it. Information security, when it started also long ago, was quite narrow, and it's opened and it's expanded, and we've joined other groups and all of that. So some of the old things that we had, the principles are still sound, but how we're applying them are a little bit different. And so we need to have that ability to go up. I have no problem sitting down with senior leaders. I just got a new one, and sitting down and understanding what's important to you, what rings your bell. How can I adjust my messaging so that it resonates with you? And saying I don't know is a perfect one. My new direct manager he's former military, so I actually don't use the words I don't know. What I do is I say I'll find out.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to hear, because if you say I don't know, period, that really is an idea of I'm static. Well, I don't know. But if I say I'll find out, which means I've acknowledged that this is important to you, I don't have the information, but I'm going to supply it for you, and I'm going to go get it. And to me, I'm actually much more comfortable in my career, in myself, and my self-esteem when I got comfortable saying I don't know, and I'll find out.
Yeah, look, it's one of those reminders as to why I love the CISO mind map. Refik Rahman and team pulled together. This year's is another good example. It just gets bigger and bigger in terms of the areas that we've got to be conversant with. It's no surprise that I don't know. I'll go find out. I'll ask an expert. That I find myself doing that more and more, not because I know less and less, but because I recognize where I am strong. For me, that's probably around GRC and SecOps. But identity access management, no, go find somebody who really knows what that's all about. I know it's important, but I'm not an expert.
Although I think let's to be clear, I think the credibility comes from coming back with the answer to that question, not necessarily with just saying I'll find out. It's coming back and with,
absolutely
with
closing the loop.
Knowledge. Yeah.
Absolutely closing the loop. Laurie used the context word, not just answering the question, but actually answering the question that wasn't asked. The so what question that has not yet been posed. It's the thinking beyond the immediate question to what's going to be the follow-up. That's as an important part of the game as anything. But absolutely never used a closed answer, I don't know, full stop, and no follow-up. You're not going to stay in your job very long then.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's also once you've gone and found someone to, once you've gone and found the answer, to reflect on that and learn, so that next time someone asks you, you do know.
Exactly.
So you can get,
Exactly. Although in fairness, if somebody were to ask me right now, what's going on with your camera, Tom? All I can say is I don't know. I'm busy working here in the background. I mean, you're here for the face, so I'm trying to give you your money's worth, really. But anyway, just to move on to another question or comment here from Alan Jones, making sure, excuse me, making sure you do your homework on the cooperative nation states and look for the common alignment and language. Start talking polar opposites without the interoperable language, and you will soon lose credibility. Nordefco, for example, I don't even know what that is. I can use interoperable language that supports the cooperative. So I think, yes, it is about, I think the fundamental point here is talking the same language as the people opposite you. I think, and that really, supports your point, Graydon, when you said ex-military, they don't want to hear, I don't know. Even though, for someone outside in a different business or from a different background, if you said, I don't know, I can find out, that's just the start of that sentence would be bad, or would be absolutely fine. So I think that's an important point. And just another one here from James, learning how to ask for help is a superpower in this industry and a worryingly uncommon one at this time. Graydon.
No, I was clapping. I was agreeing.
Clapping. Sorry, I thought you were. No, absolutely. The flip side to this, though, is that when someone asks you for help as a supervisor, is that you don't use that as a as a scoring point or as an opportunity to crack down on them for not knowing as well. You've got to talk the talk on it.
Look, I think that last point, Tom, is actually the crux of it, is being able to walk the talk, not just talk the talk.
Yeah.
There's an issue running in the UK at the moment that I and many veterans have got an eye on, because it may or may not hit us in the pocket. But I've got a degree of empathy for the people on the wrong side of that incident at the moment, because they will be burning the midnight oil, I am sure. And I think I know some of them. So reaching out and saying, when you're ready, let's go get a cup of coffee, or is there anything we can do to help? Because this is a community. It's not a game. This is a war. We're actually, sorry, and I am going to stick with that. This is a war we're engaged in without it actually having been declared. And at the moment, the attackers are more joined up and more effective than the defenders are, because the defenders are isolated in pockets, our individual businesses. Mm-hmm. And that's not the way we're going to win this. But that's a conversation the board needs to recognize, that they're not an isolated business, that their suppliers are important, their customers are part of it, that we have to do this on a collective basis. We're very well putting our controls in place, but what's everybody else doing?
Tom, that might be a perfect topic for another one of these events, which is the sharing of information. As Alan is so spot on with that, is that companies are so much like, I don't want to let other people know that something bad happened, when we don't learn from each other. So I would submit that we talk about that at another time. It's a long
But I think that's also how you maintain credibility as well. I think that is also relevant. I was talking to another CISO the other day, and we were lamenting the fact that CISOs and security people on the whole tend to collaborate quite well together. It's the organizations they belong to that don't want them to collaborate together. And that, I think, is a bit backwards, because you'd think the security folks would want to be keeping all the secrets, and the businesses would want to be getting every single competitive advantage they can. But it does seem to be the other way around.
Yeah, unfortunately.
When we're advising our clients, that, you know, we're speaking about other things that have happened, how other organizations have dealt with things, and that sharing part of it is so integral into our credibility, because it is based on experience and what others are doing, right? We need to learn. I did like the point around the unlearn. That was in one of the comments. That's also quite important. But there is strength in numbers, and I don't like the war kind of comments, but obviously it is that we are in that kind of situation, you know, and if we're not talking, it's not going to work. But I do feel like it's a culture within in the security community that is quite good at, to your point, Tom.
Yeah.
People talk. That's why you never badmouth. We're always helping each other.
Yeah, because, well, quite apart from the fact that, you know, many CISO is kind of looking at the one who's in trouble and sort of saying, well, crikey, glad that's not me. You know.
But do you think a lot of the time it's kind of focusing on the negatives and, oh, this has happened to so-and-so, this is what they did, and really we should be having a lot more positive reinforcement on what our organization's doing well. And I feel like that's where we need to improve communication and collaboration around what are the successes, what are the things that are done to stop these things from happening. So I think that's the direction we now need to start going in, rather than talking about the doom and gloom.
Yeah, and I think Laurie, that's beginning to happen. You know, we've had a recent case study published by the British Library after their incident, that if you've not found it, I'd highly recommend to go read it, because it's a really good lessons identified piece for others to have a look at and see whether they could learn from it. That doesn't happen often enough.
Lovely turn of phrase from James Bohr again. Information about incidents and threats may not be publicly shared, but the knitting circles are some of the best information exchange networks in existence. And backed up by Alan Jones here, saying that Denmark can give you some good examples of CISO information exchanging. But yeah, I think it's vital. It's vital. We have to learn from everybody's mistakes to go back to an earlier, or learn from our collective mistakes to go back to an earlier point.
Hey, Tom, to Laurie's point, not just the mistakes, but also what worked. And that's the piece that I find. That's the piece that I find we don't talk often enough. Is what worked? What was it that, I don't know, did flag that there was an intrusion? A good while ago, over 10 years ago, I took a tip from a vacuum manufacturer about the benefits of using a honeypot inside the network, because it was one of those fail-safe detection mechanisms where the only traffic going there was going to be bad traffic, because there was no routing mechanism for good traffic to go there. And I thought, that's a good idea. I'm going to take that idea. And we did, and it worked. But I took that, we deployed it internally, but when our day came, I wasn't allowed to talk about that publicly because my then employer didn't want to raise the heads above the bar. And that view is still too prevalent.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. You know, CISOs don't get embarrassed about this because we all know that it could happen to any of us at any given time. Whereas organizations, management in inverted commas, they don't want any kind of bad press that would put them at a disadvantage. So it is kind of understandable in that context. Great. Yeah,
so let me bring up, I mean, we talked earlier about, you know, business risk and all that as different from what we're doing. You're absolutely right. As an information security professional and as a former CISO too, you know, you have to balance it out. We want to do these things, but there is also a real impact to talking publicly and how much you talk. And so I don't look at organizations' reticence to share information as necessarily a bad thing. What I look at it as is, how can I communicate more effectively so that they understand the benefit of doing this and can help me set the right constraints and boundaries as to what should or should not be said. You know, this could be something that we're talking with marketing people and PR and that sort of thing, because it may have adverse impacts to stock prices and coming mergers or all sorts of things that we don't normally consider in the cybersecurity space.
Yeah.
If I may, I mean, 30 years ago, security education for staff would have been on my list of priorities, but it probably would have been 10th of 10. That's very much not the case now.
Yeah.
And when I think about how can I influence the business to move in the right direction, what I consider to be the secure direction, I don't just think about the board directors, recognizing that the board, of course, has got executives and non-executives. It's got to be at all levels of the business. It's not just the leadership. The leadership is important and setting the tone at the top, etc. They're all important, but you've got to get out. You've got to get out to your fellow staff members who are on the front line in front of a screen connected to the outside world, because they are the tripwire. We can, forgive me, loosely here, talk about our staff being the problem. We talk about layer 8, the human layer, being the problem. No, it's not. It's just that they don't know as much as we do. And actually, they don't want to know as much as we do because they wouldn't necessarily sleep comfortably at night.
They just need their firmware updated.
Defense. They're not the weakest, right? It's your strongest line of defense, your staff. That's why it's so integral to have that at all layers, right? Because otherwise you're not going to drive positive behavior, and you can't drive cultural change without that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's why I'm recognizing they're in the front line. I'm not going to call them the weakest link, but I don't think they're the strongest, which is why it's not just security education. It's not just security awareness. It's actually giving them the guidelines, the guardrails to operate freely, but to know that there's a button on the top right to report a phishing email, that there's a red telephone that they can ring the security team to report something suspicious, because I'd much rather know about it directly than find out about it 4 days later, because it's all about the golden hour and getting to the problem to contain the breach, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, I don't actually like phishing tests because it puts the security team back in the place of catching out their colleagues. Yeah. I prefer using a real fish that's been come in, ideally that's been reported by a member of staff, and show to everybody else, look, we've had this report, it's accurate, this is what we picked up on. Use a live example, but not one that you've created to catch people out. That puts security back where I think we've largely moved from. That's my own view.
So we've come to the end of the show. I'm going to go around each of you. You've got oh goodness me, you've got 10 seconds each basically for us to make this work. Happens every week. So the main question is, what should our audience members do when they get back to their desks in the morning? Laurie, I'm going to start with you, if I may.
For me, it's about measuring your decisions. So kind of reflecting on what you've actually done. So do that cost benefit analysis. Don't just make a decision, run with it and move to the next thing. Let's take accountability of our actions so that we can improve and learn for the next time.
Great. Graydon.
So I would say to the audience, we here have tons of experience behind us, all four of us. And what we're talking about may seem relatively easy and straightforward. It isn't. And while we can come up with what we need to do quickly, getting it in place is hard. So when you go back, realize this isn't as easy as flipping a switch. You're going to have to talk about it. And as we mentioned earlier, collaboration, asking other people how they did it, what worked right, what worked wrong, things they would have done different. Let's keep this dialogue going into the future. That's it.
Excellent. And Alan?
I think the clue is in the first line here, is building that rapport with the board. That takes time. That can be a challenge for the nerds amongst us because we're into soft skills rather than hard skills. But go spend 15 minutes with the CFO just chatting over the day. It will pay dividends when push comes to shove when you're in the wrong place.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. Before we leave, we do have a couple of things to announce, obviously. Our next teissTalk is on the 23rd of May. That's the week after next, 4 o'clock, and that's on fortifying your cyber defenses as a mid-sized organization. We now also come to the Teiss mug. We've actually got a lot of things going on here. First of all, a very important message I see from Ugo. Tom, I haven't received my mug. We will get the elves and the goblins and the people in the back office straight onto that. As regards the mug, I'm going to push my luck and I'm going to say there's 2 mugs being awarded this week. The first one is for James Bohr because, well, frankly, he was putting more questions in there than I've seen from any single person. And, of course, I do need to keep my promise. So one way or the other, Martin Hepworth, you will get your mug as well, if only for the reference to a song about accepting the risk. So all that remains for me to say is, Laurie, Graydon and Alan, thank you very much for your wit, wisdom, contributions and charm for today's show. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And for the rest of you, goodbye and stay secure, my friends.
Thank you to our listener.